Every time a content creator posts anything about this game, any composition, the internet go crazy, the comments are on fire. People are always suggesting different comps and different gear on different artifact that would have done a better result. So I decided to take the matter in my hands and do a deep dive and a scientific experiment with my gear and my artifact and find out what is the best solution for my composition. So grab a drink, sit down comfortably. Today we're talking numbers and artifacts. Dragonheir is a very complicated game full of layer of complication that stacks in different way depending on the champions you have, the gear, the season, etc. So when we are looking at building champions, there are so many factors we should consider. And we have also to consider the RNG, so my gear is always different than yours. If you can't push the same stats with the same gear, you might have to look for something else sometimes. There is gear that ignore defense on derivative damage, for example, that might go on derivative damage champion. But if you don't have the right stats for that set of gear, maybe you can go with something else like the Inventor set that does more raw damage and build the Enlightenment passively by the substats. So that is something that we should consider as well. Now, before we get into the deep dive on the artifact, we should also consider one factor. This experiment has been done last week when the Vortex boss was taking more damage from Wild, and I've done that on purpose because I wanted to test my comps on a playing field. I didn't want to get any advantage from melee, derivative damage, or distance from the boss, anything that could in some way uneven the playing and push the damage of one of the champions forward compared to the others. I wanted to have a much cleaner sheet where I can compare the artifact combination with the gear on my champions and do an experiment based on that. To kick off the experiment, I used my Vortex team as a baseline and did a bunch of runs to test what their damage output could be. And as you can see up on the screenshot, I've put the Crown Onion Clean on Nathaniel. Now this is an odd choice and I know a lot of you will have a lot to say about this, but hear me out. I had to try to put my DPS on a playing field here. And so I had to move the crown on someone else and give them the opportunity to do as much damage as possible. And to be sure that that is happening, I've basically kept only the run that runs at least through 6 minutes point 1, which is where the boss does the ultimate with 80 stacks and where my comps usually die. And I've avoided recording the damage of any variation that is way too big. So I kept the 5 runs testing where the damage was in a reasonable range of difference and had the timing over 6 minute point 1. As you can see, my best run was 6 minute point 1 and I've done 35.2 million damage. And the gear is what you see on the screen for each of the runs. So I have Furbat in the protection set with the Scarab Amulet. I have Nathaniel with the Zero set with the Crown Onion Clean. I have Nimbus with the Gambler set and the Blood of the Dragon artifact. I have Suta and Ivelios in Inventor. Suta with the Horseshoe, the giver crit damage and attack speed, and Ivelios with the RP Nail that increase the damage from the passive and give him a lot of attack. Now for the timing, I'm using Furbat at 21.6 seconds every 20 seconds and Nathaniel at 14 seconds every 20 seconds to protect on the only hit that is not covered by the decreased attack. And this will be consistent throughout the entire experiment. The gear on the champion will be the same. The artifact on Nathaniel and Furbat will stay the same. I'm only going to swap out the artifact on the DPS to see which one is more affecting whom. So the first comparison has been done with Ivelios using the ink instead of the RP Nail. Now the debate has always been there, RP Nail or ink, because basically some of these champions do damage through derivative damage, and the ink increase the damage from derivative, while the RP Nail increase the damage from this passive. Ivelios does is passive, hitting, has 40% chance of hitting where Dauntless team are doing their skill, and therefore there is an extra layer of RNG. But from this experiment, you can see that the damage drop between the RP Nail and the ink is kind of reliably 3 millions. So we're dropping a little bit of damage and is only on Ivelios. The comps has done its better performance at 6 minute 30 with 32 million damage, which is 3 millions away from my best score with the previous composition with the gear that we saw before. And the damage difference is mainly from Ivelios, while the other champions are doing similar damage. And you can see that even if we go to the lower one, with 6 minutes 01 and 29.6 million, the main difference remain on Ivelios. There's a bit less damage from the others, probably because we proc less decreased defense on that run, but the differential from the top range damage and the bottom range damage is still in line. It's only less than 8% when it was less than 9% on my main comp. So we can consider the experiment reliable, and we can consider that the RP nails from my Ivelios and my gear is more effective than the ink. So we put back the RP nail on Ivelios and proceed to test the other two champions. Now to do this, I had to swap the artifact because both of them take advantage from the attack speed. And the two artifacts, the Horseshoe and the Blood of the Dragon, both give some sort of advantage with attack speeds directly or through the second part of the artifact inside, not the main stat. Now, one gives crit damage and attack speed, the other one gives attack speed and crit rate. I don't need the crit rate on Suta, mainly I need it more on Nimbus, and that's why originally I went with those two artifacts in this composition that you can see on the screen as a reference line. By swapping them though, I had to test the effect, and so as you can see on the screen, all my runs are ending at 6 minutes, 0.1, with my best run being at 30 million, 0.6, and Ivelios is back to his original level of damage at 13 million, but the damage from Suta has dropped considerably. We've lost 3 million compared to the baseline, and that is pretty much massive. It is where this composition falls short. There is a little bit of variation on the other champions, but nothing recognizable as a main drop. Now, Nimbus performed pretty much the same in both situations, which is interesting. The damage is slightly higher and slightly lower on the top and bottom hand of the range, but not massively different. While Suta has a massive drop across the board. And as you can see, the differential between the top run and the bottom run is still in the range of the 9%, so in line with the baseline experiment. And so I'm drawn to believe that the original baseline is a better solution with Nimbus with the Dragon Blood and Suta with the Horseshoe. I can squeeze more damage out of them, again, compared to my gear. For the third experiment, I wanted to use the RP nail on Suta because she does a lot of damage with her passive. She basically casts a ghost every time she crits that does an extra hit, and therefore I wanted to test if the RP nail, increasing the damage from the passive, was effective on her. And to do so, I had to put the ink back on Ivelios for lack of alternative, really. So the experiment is really not on the overall throughout output damage, but on the damage on Suta specifically on this test. As you can see, my top score has been 30.2 million, so pretty much in line with what we've seen before, with around 6 minutes 0.1 seconds, and the longest run being 6 minutes 21, with the lowest score though of 28 million 0.8. Ivelios obviously drop off the damage as we've seen before with the ink, but Suta also, it's not able to replicate that damage that comes from the Horseshoe. Her damage is lower of about 1 million, 1 million 0.5 in certain case, and the rest of the composition damage is pretty much the same. So I'm again drawn to believe that the Horseshoe is the best artifact for her. And if I combine the artifact again with the results from these experiments, I get back to my baseline where I had the Blood of the Dragon on Nimbus, the Horseshoe on Suta, and the RP nail on Ivelios. The next experiment is probably what we all been waiting for when I finally put the Crown and Unclean on Nimbus. Nimbus being a multi-hit ultimate has the highest chance to place the decreased defense on the boss with reliable consistency. And therefore I've done this experiment too. But to get to a playing field with the baseline comp, had to also to change the gear over here, because otherwise Nathaniel will not place the increased attack on the other champion, not having any debuff to place on his ultimate, and therefore I've placed the 0 set also on Nimbus. I've tried to push as much damage as possible on that build, but as you can see, even with a time of 6 minutes 21, stretching out the run with the better artifact on Nathaniel, with a better shield, we are dropping 5 million compared to the baseline. There is 5 minions less damage throughout most of the fights. I've done again 5 fights. I've had more than 5 fights, keeping the 5 fights that gets over 6 minutes 21 and have a difference in damage of less than 8-9%. As we can see here, the damage difference is minimal, is getting up to 96%, so only 4% difference damage basically between the top 8 and the bottom one. But we are dropping 5 million, and there are many reasons for this, and trying to analyze why. Basically it's because, in my opinion, Nimbus lose a lot of attack speed and therefore lose a lot of triggers of his passive, of his ultimate, where it basically does more attack based on the amount of attack speed he has. This also trigger less Evelius, and their Evelius drop damage and Nimbus drop damage. And if you summarize those two differences in damage, you have roughly that 5 millions. So we have about 2 millions drops, 1 million point something from Evelius, and we have 3 millions difference from Nimbus. Sum them up and you get that roughly that 5 million. That is the main reason, in my opinion. I know that the differential between the top score and the bottom score, it's minimal, but we still have a better result in our baseline, having the Crown and Clean on Nathaniel on a single hit ultimate champion instead of having a multi-hit. You might have to run the run a little bit more times to get your highest score, but you get a much better score just relying on that 75% instead of going with 25% extra or having the decreased defense and losing damage on one on your DPS. At least this is the results that came from this experiment. But there is another experiment I've done, because even showing the results of this one to one of my clan mates said that probably the increased attack was not the way of going on Nimbus. I should have kept the Gambler set, and so next experiment is about that. So for the last and final experiment, we went back to my original gear and we put back the gear, exact same gear on every single champion. So Furbet in protection, Nathaniel in Cyril, Nimbus in Gambler set, and Suta and Evelius in the Inventor set. And the only swap will be the Crown and Clean on Nimbus and the Tiara on Nathaniel. Now, Nimbus has enough accuracy to do the job. The decreased defense has been up basically the entire fight. And as you can see, the extra survivability from Nathaniel has stretched the time up to 6 minute 50 on the top range and 6 minute 21 on my bottom score. So we had almost a minute more to do damage in this situation. But nevertheless, the damage drop is massive. The best score I managed to get from this comp was 28.5 million and the bottom one 127.8. The lack of the increased attack is massive, and you definitely want the increased attack on your comp. You need that. It's pushing your damage much higher, and usually you should have the decreased attack, the increased attack, and the decreased defense on the same champion, whoever the test champion is. As you can see, the damage differential between the top score and the bottom score for this comp is only 97.6, so just above the 2%. It's very close from the top score to the bottom one. It's very consistent, obviously, but you're lacking a lot of damage compared to the more RNG and more differential baseline that we tested in the beginning of this video. So I don't know if this is conclusive, but for me it is, at least for my comp. I will keep running my baseline. I will keep doing this weird thing on keeping my Crown and Clean on Nathaniel and using a single hit ultimate to place the decreased defense. I know it's more RNG, but my experiment kind of proved that I can push more damage off of this comp compared to any other combination of DPS artifact, swapping on them, or trying different things and push the Crown and Clean on one of my DPS, lose the damage from someone. It doesn't work for me. I will keep doing what I'm doing, and I hope this experiment helps some of you understanding how I build my comps and how you maybe can consider build your. So it's everything for today, and I'll see you soon with another video about Dragonheir Science.